the numbers are starting to kind of settle down a little bit. So again, welcome to our Understanding Your SAT Data webinar, and we'll get started. Here is the presentation team that we have today. Tammy Hilton is going to be your presenter. I'm Heather Jenkins. I'm going to be your facilitator for the day. Annie Wallace from the New Hampshire DOE will probably pop on the call at some point as well. So let's get started. Just some logistics and general information. We want to thank the New Hampshire Department of Education. They are the ones that facilitate our ability to do this, right? So they are, we have a contract with them and they allow this to be a free webinar for you. So we appreciate them and all of their support for allowing us to get this information out. The other big piece of logistics is everyone is muted. We don't hear you, we can't see you. So, you know, you can go about it. The other part of this is because we can't hear you or see you, there's this raise the hand feature. We're going to ask you, it's really difficult in a webinar format for you to use that raise the hand. So if you have questions, please type them into the Q&A. I will be looking at the Q&A throughout this webinar. And if you have something that you want everybody to see, you can put it in the chat, but I'll mostly be checking that Q&A. You will get an email tomorrow that has the link to this presentation. It will also have your certificate in there. It will show you where the webinar will be located and all of that. And then there's some supplemental documents that Tammy's going to talk a lot about, and those are also in the folder as well. At the end, please hang on for just a little bit. We're going to try to finish up to give you a few minutes to complete a really quick 4-question, maybe 5-question survey. We'll put it in the chat at the end. We look at the feedback. If you've been to any of our webinars, we really truly do value the information that you give us, and we try to make changes and modify content if we can to be able to meet the needs of as many people as we can. So the goals for today, this is where I'm going to pass it off to Tammy, and I'm going to turn my camera off. We are in the same room, so hopefully you can hear me talking, but she's the more important one. She's sitting right next to me, so I'll feed her any of the information I can as we go through.
All right, thank you, Heather. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We are excited to talk about SAT today. I just wanted to say hello and let you all see me. I will be turning my camera off as well, just so it becomes less distracting as we proceed. But what I'm hoping you will walk away with today is an understanding of the content within the SAT. I also hope that you learn where and how to find SAT results so that you can go back and look at them to understand how to use the protocols we're going to talk about to analyze these results and drive your instruction. And this is our agenda. So we're going to start with that background and structure of SAT. Then we'll get into where to find that data, some protocols you can use to look at data, understanding how you can use this for instructional change, and then we will wrap up. So I'm going to turn my camera off, like I said, but I am still here, and Heather is monitoring that Q&A, so feel free to put anything in that section as it comes up. All right. So these were the dates for the 2022 SAT school day. The 2023 dates have not been released yet, but they're typically around the same time of year. Schools can choose to use the testing windows as necessary that they're given. The New Hampshire Department of Ed does require that all students in 11th grade take the SAT test with the essay, and the test in New Hampshire is given in digital format. Oh, and I forgot to mention, anytime you see a blue link, that is a hyperlink to a live document. So when you get a copy of these slides, you will be able to go and click on any links for more additional information. All right, so this is all about accommodations. So this is the information for students who need accommodations for the test. All students, again, will take the test digitally as their peers unless their IEP says otherwise. Accommodations have been designated testing windows as well in the SSD, which stands for Services for Students with Disabilities. And again, I've linked you to the full accommodation booklet, which you'll receive also in the handouts in that follow-up email tomorrow. Okay, so as many of you may have heard, College Board is changing the SAT, but it's not happening until 2024. So while there are some changes coming, it really is important to note that the SAT will remain on a 1,600 point scale, and it's going to continue to test skills related to the 3 subject areas of reading, writing, and math. There's still going to be a proctor. So going digital does not mean that students are going to be able to take it at home or whenever they want to. And testing security is going to be in place. So with that being said, some of the new changes are going to include shorter reading passages. There's only going to be 1 question rather than multiple for each of the passages. Progress is going to be saved in the event of a power outage or technology malfunction, which is really great. Kids are going to get faster score reports. So rather than having to wait weeks to get the results, students are going to receive their score reports from the digital tests in a matter of days. The reports have typically included percentile rankings and breakdown of student scores. They've also are going to provide, though, information about 4-year colleges and scholarship opportunities. But under the new format, the College Board also plans to expand that information to include resources about local community colleges, workforce training, and career opportunities. So the blue link on this slide is going to take you to the full article where you can read more about all of those exciting changes. Okay, so here's the general breakdown of the SAT. So you can see here the time allotted for each section and the number of questions. On all the questions, there is no penalty for guessing. So if kids are not sure, encourage them to guess rather than leave the response blank. And again, it doesn't mention it, but the SAT also does have an essay component. So this gives us a better specific breakdown of the SAT even more. So students are going to get a total score comprised from the 2 major sections of math and English, which include both reading and writing. Within those categories, you can see there's science, history, and social studies information. That's going to be embedded into the questions that they're going to see. And that's what's going to be reported in the cross-test scores. So when we look at reports here in a little bit, this will hopefully make a little more sense. And then within all of those categories are even more specific subscores that you could break things down into. And then the essay is a separate score, and we're going to talk about the essay a little bit here on this next slide. So this is a look at the SAT more in depth. You have, the kids have 1 prompt. They are given a passage to read. Each passage typically ranges from about 650 to 750 words. And then they're assessed by 2 scorers on a 1 to 4 point scale. So the 2 rater scores are added together to arrive at the scores between a 2 and an 8. So that would be the total score a child could receive. The biggest thing with the essay that trips students up is that they want to write their own opinions or thoughts. And that is not at all what the essay actually asks for. The essay on the SAT is actually about analysis of the author's craft and techniques. So I have linked you to a full SAT rubric on this slide. It's really great to look at some SAT exemplars, which are also going to be provided in that folder of resources that Heather mentioned, to do a writing calibration to see if you as a grade level or as a school sort of line up in regards to writing expectations across grade levels, content areas, districts, etc. On the essay, students are required to make purposeful, substantial use of text evidence in a way that can be objectively evaluated as they analyze how the author of the passage develops and supports his or her claims. So again, the essay on the SAT is not designed to elicit student subjective opinions. They're going to be asked to identify how an author strengthened or weakened their argument in a passage using rhetorical devices or word choice or grammar and structure. The prompt is consistent for all SAT test. So the prompt itself is never going to change. It's only going to be the passages that may change that the kids have to read. And again, they get that total score of between a 2 and an 8. And the essay score is not included in that score of 1,600 or whatever this child may score between the math and ELA combo. So this is an example of a passage that the students may receive on the SAT. So this is written by Eric Kleinberg in 2013. It was called Viewpoint, Air Conditioning Will Be the End of Us. And it was in Time magazine. And in this, he argued how Americans abuse the use of the air conditioning system when the heat goes up. So Kleinberg argues in this passage that every American, whenever the temperature rises due to heat, they're not using their air conditioning wisely. They're cranking it up to try to cool down every room of the house, so on and so forth. And you'll have access to this full version in the handout section. But this is the prompt that kids are going to get based on that. So again, the prompt is never going to change. It's only going to be the passages that might change. But you can see here that it's asking the kids to really think about the author's claim and make some connections and use text evidence. Okay, so reading passages. So there are 5 reading passages on the SAT, which include 4 standalone and 1 pair of passages that you read together. They are between 500 and 750 words, and they are drawn from any of the following types of documents. So they could be drawn from a literary passage, which would be a work of fiction. They could be drawn from a founding document. For example, like the US Constitution. Or it could be from like some sort of global conversation, like a speech from Nelson Mandela. It could be from economics, psychology, sociology, or other social sciences. And then you're going to have 2 passages from scientific works that talk about foundational concepts of either earth science, biology, chemistry, or physics. The questions on the reading test all fall into 3 broad categories. So the first category is going to be how an author uses evidence. So in this one, this category, it's going to ask the students to show that they understand how an author is using evidence to support a claim. In the second category, it's all about understanding words in context. So the context part is really important because they're going to ask the kids to use context clues to figure out meanings of words and phrases. Other questions might ask them how, an author's choice of words shapes the meaning, style, or tone. And then the third category is going to be analysis in history and social studies and science. So the reading passages in here are going to include things from the fields of history, social studies, or science, and they're going to be asked to draw on their reading skills that are needed most to support those areas. So it might be interpreting data. It might be considering implications. It might be examining a hypothesis. And the answers are based only on the content that is stated in those passages, not what they're implying from them. All right, so here's an example of a reading passage. So this one's adapted from a short story. And it revolves around this character named Nawabdin, who's an electrician who lives off an influential man and helps him slow down the revolutions of the meter. So as you take a look at this passage, think about what might be hard for students to be successful. Really think about the structure, notice the vocabulary that's being used, and think about the importance of background knowledge that kids would need if they were going to be successful with reading this and then answering questions. Also, something to keep in mind when you are analyzing SAT questions or looking at data to inform your instruction, it's really important to remember that kids in New Hampshire, when they do the SAT on test day, it's online. So you want to take into consideration the impact that could have on students too. And I say this because these questions will hopefully get you thinking about strategies that you can use to help students be successful readers, not just for this SAT test, because we certainly don't want to teach to the test, but within all of your content areas as well. And again, while this passage happens to be from a short fiction story, some of the reading passages are nonfiction and based in the science and social studies areas, as we saw in that breakdown. So once the kids read that passage, this is just an example of 3 types of questions that they may have to answer based on it. So notice that they're all multiple choice, but they are asking for knowledge in specific skill areas. So they're asking for knowledge in author's purpose, in vocabulary, and then the author's craft of using imagery. So we want to make sure that we're teaching these skills in our classes so that students have multiple opportunities to practice with work that really engages them in the thinking process and the application to work. And then for those that are wondering the answers to these, question 1 would be C, question 2 would be B, and question 3 is D. All right. So writing and language passages. So there are 4 passages. They're about 400 to 450 words. The complexity of them varies. They are all about different topics, including careers, science, humanities, social studies. The purpose and format of each passage varies. So there's going to be at least one narrative passage, meaning it's going to read sort of like a story. It's not necessarily a work of fiction. It could be literary nonfiction. The other passages are going to be argumentative or contain charts, infographics, graphs, things like that. Each passage has 11 multiple choice questions with 2 main types. So those where you improve on the expression of ideas, and then those where kids have to recognize and correct errors in a passage using sentence structure, grammar, usage, punctuation, knowledge. And expression of ideas asks them to improve the substance and quality of the writer's message. And those are really divided into 3 areas. Development about questions about main ideas. So things like topic sentences, thesis statements, supporting details, quantitative information in tables, charts, or graphs. They're also going to look at organization questions, which will focus on logical sequence and placement of ideas and information, and then effective language, which is going to ask them to think about the wordiness or the style or the tone or combining sentences, etc. And then standard conventions is going to focus on correcting grammar, usage, mechanic problems, etc. So this is an example this is going to talk a little bit about what students have to do, and then the questions and what they're focused on. So this just breaks it down for you a little bit more. This is the example that I was just mentioning about this part of the test. So this is the writing and language test. Again, think about the structure. What are you noticing about this? What might be difficult for students to understand in relation to the passages or the questions to be successful? And then for those that are wondering, question 1, D is the best choice. For question 2, A is the best choice. All right, so we're going to talk about math. So this is a reference tool that is provided to all SAT test takers from College Board. No other notes are allowed on the test. The math section is divided into 2 parts, a calculator portion and a non-calculator portion. In both areas, most of the test is multiple choice. However, some questions at the end are going to ask the kids to write the answer, which are called grid-ins, and we'll talk about those more in a few minutes. Calculators are important tools. So like I said, there is a calculator section. However, to succeed after high school, the kids are going to need to know when and how to use them. And we have found that in the math calculator portion of the test, they're able to focus on complex modeling and reasoning, but sometimes the calculator can actually hold kids back and weigh them down and sort of slow them down. So even though they're allowed to use a calculator, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to have to. And then in the no calculator portion of the test, it just makes it easier to assess their fluency and their math understanding with concepts. And it also tests whether or not well-learned techniques in terms of number sense have been acquired. So this is what the grid-in looks like on the SAT. So again, most of the test questions are multiple choice. 22% though are student produced response questions, which are called these grid-ins. So instead of choosing the correct answer from a list of options, they're going to need to solve problems and then enter their answers into this grid, which will be provided for them. And then it will give them all the directions, but it's really important that they don't fill in any more than one bubble in any column, and that, you know, they really practice with that skill, because the grid can hold up to only 4 decimal places, and those are going to matter when it comes to answering a question correctly, for sure. Okay. So there are 4 categories when it comes to the math test. So you have Heart of Algebra, which is going to focus on the mastery of linear equations and systems. Problem solving and data analysis is going to be all about analyzing problems, drawing information from that data, etc. Passport to Advanced Math is going to ask the kids questions that are going to require them to manipulate complex equations. And then the math test also includes 2 questions from a section they're calling additional topics in math, which are going to include things from geometry and trigonometry that are most relevant to college and career readiness. So here's a little bit more information about the Heart of Algebra and sort of the breakdown. So again, this is all about linear equations and functions. It's going to ask them to create equations that represent a situation, or solve equations and systems of equation and make connections between different linear relationships. The problem solving and data analysis is going to include the ratios and percentages and proportional reasoning to solve problems in real world situations, including science, social studies, and other contexts. And it's going to also include describing relationships that can be shown graphically or analyze statistical data. This group of skills is really about being quantitatively literate and demonstrating a command of those math reasoning skills that they'll need throughout college or even career training programs and everyday life. In Passport to Advanced Math, it really focuses on the math that they're going to need to pursue a further study in a discipline such as a science or economic field of some sort. So really it's focusing on those STEM fields. And it's going to require familiarity with complex equations and functions, which are going to help prepare them for calculus or advanced courses in statistics or whatever it might be. And then again, they have this additional topics section. There's 6 questions overall that come from this section. 3 are in the no calculator section and 3 are in the calculator section. And these questions are going to include topics from geometry to trigonometry to radian measure and complex numbers. And then these are examples from the non-calculator portion of the test. So again, looking at the structure, think about what may be hard, what may not be hard, keeping in mind that kids are doing this in a digital type format. And then for those that are wondering, here were the answers. And here are the other answers for the other 2. And then here's what the calculator portion looks like. Very similar to the non, except kids get to use the calculator. And then here is just some information about the correct answers from that previous slide. So I just wanted you to have these. I'm sure we could spend the whole hour on these, but we're going to move on. All right. So when we think about tracking SAT data, we really want to use it to inform instruction, and which is really imperative because PSAT and SAT data can be indicators as to how successful students are going to be in college. Even if they're not going to college right off, they may eventually end up back in college. And so it's really nice to be able to track this data, track cohorts of kids, and kind of see where kids are going. So this is the breakdown here. So this is going to kind of talk to you a little bit about the 11th grade benchmark scores and what this all means. And the grade level benchmarks are really, again, set to reflect typical annual growth and reflect on the probability of success. And then here I've given you some links to different types of things. So the video that's embedded here is going to give you an overview of how kids can practice practice the SAT through Khan Academy. If they have a College Board account, it is free for them to practice. Many educators, when I travel around to schools or I do these webinars, will ask about what the testing experience is like for students. So I've linked you to a site here where you can see exactly that. The site is going to take you through it as if you were a kid, and it's going to help, which will, I hope, will help you plan for your instruction, because you can really get the same experience that they're getting. And you can really think about the strategies and skills that they're being asked to do. Again, we're not teaching to a test. We are teaching skills and strategies in our classes and in our content so that students can then apply these and transfer their knowledge to whatever it is they're being asked to do. And that's really the ultimate goal of why we do what we do as teachers, right? Is to get kids to think beyond our classroom and apply their knowledge and skills. All right, so any questions so far?
I don't think so. We don't have any questions. Please do make sure that you put them in the chat or in the Q&A portion, and I'll make sure to get those to Tammy, but I think that's pretty straightforward.
Okay, great. We are going to keep trucking along then. Okay, so we're going to talk about where you can find your SAT data. So one place you can look would be in Performance Plus. And so you would log into Performance Plus. This is where you would go. This is the main page. And once you get in there, you can see overall scores alongside any local assessment data, such as that you might put in there, like midterms, finals, whatever it might be. Your SAT data is uploaded into P+ every spring after SATs, and you can look at these longitudinal reports overall in math or the ELA sections. And again, if you have other data in here, you can see that in comparison to the SAT data.
So just, I know there's a question here about Performance Plus, and not everybody has access to Performance Plus. There are specific districts who purchase it. If you have any questions about it, I would ask one of your administrators to see. Performance Plus used to be available to everybody in the state, and it has been for years now. Specific districts purchase it. So if you have questions about that, please reach out to us. We can get you some information about that. But it is not necessarily a free site. So I just want to give a heads up on that.
Perfect. Thank you, Heather. And then here's just showing you a little bit more in depth where you can view the section scores for all of your students. And you can also view SAT scores, not just in relation to other types of data you may have in there, but you can also view the scores relative to demographic data, attendance history, student groups, kids with IEPs, etc. Another place you can go would be iPlatform. So this is where you can go in and view section scores in comparison to other New Hampshire schools or different variables like EL populations or special ed populations or whatever. And you can click on the image when you get your participant copy of this slideshow and go directly to the the iPlatform login, more specifically the iReport.
This particular platform is available to everybody in the state. It is a New Hampshire DOE platform. So when you get there, you won't have to log in or anything. You just choose your specific information for your district and you'll be able to see some of the information there.
Perfect. Thank you, Heather. So once you log in, this is an example of a score report from the iPlatform. So you can see here where the kids fell, what the state target was, and the level of proficiency. And the state divides data into 4 levels, just like the New Hampshire SAS for accountability purposes. So that's what this is showing us here. And then this one, again, is just showing you a little bit of the participation versus the percentage. The DLM is special education modified assessments for students that are excused from the SAT. So that's what that means on here. This is a page where you'll be able to track trends and patterns in data over 3 years worth of time. Of course, here 2020 has been included, which was the year of COVID, so no testing occurred. But if it had, there would have been some data here. And then this is a good reference tool in regards to graduation and attendance rates. Again, to allow you to track patterns and trends over 3 years worth of time. And remember, tracking historical data can be a good predictor of future data as well. So it's really important that you look not just at a particular year, but you look at data over the course of a few years to analyze and change as needed. And then here again is just showing you some more information, ways that you could break down data, look at specific types of populations, etc. And I just wanted to show you here too, where all of this can be looked at. And again, we can see that college and career readiness over time, and then look at graduation rates and look at all kinds of things. Okay, so then you can also use iPlatform to compare your school to others. So this is what that report would look like as you go through and do that. The other place, and I find this super helpful, is Rate in College Board itself. And if we have any administrators on the call, it is really great if you can offer your teachers access to the College Board site as well, because they're the ones that really need to be looking at this data, using it to inform instruction, tracking cohorts of kids. So I would highly suggest, if you are a district where it's only admins and or guidance school counselors that may get to use this report, I highly recommend you giving it to all of the teachers because it's really beneficial. So this is what you would go in, you'd be able to see here. Again, we really want teachers using this because this information is truly invaluable. So once you are logged in, there are different ways you can search for different types of reports. So you can choose by student name, or you can let the portal choose for you, where you can see that option here. So you'll go in, you might choose the type of test and test date that you want to review. Remember, the school day is the official New Hampshire State Assessment Day, and that's where the data is pulled for accountability. And the best data, it's the best data to use because all of your students have taken it on that specific day. This is what the school counseling office uses. If you're a school counselor on the call, I'm sure you're very familiar with this, but this is just how they would print like admission tickets for the kiddos. This report here, this is from the scores and benchmark report. This gives you a great picture of how you or your district or your school compares to the state. And then this is just another view of it. You can break it down even further, and it's going to show you the total, the state score, the district. If you're a district that has more than one high school in it, for example, like if you have 2 or 3 high schools, you would see all of those within the district and then the specific schools. You have the ability to batch questions to print for question analysis purposes. So you can select 1 or more questions here. You can choose to print all questions or just print the questions and answers that you chose. So let's talk about that a little bit more. So first, you can go in here and you can choose or search by a percentage correct. So you might say, I only want to look at all of the types of questions that kids got 30% or below on, or whatever it might be. So you can search that. You could also search questions by difficulty so that you can analyze their level of difficulty a little bit more. So you might say, I want to analyze only the hard questions, or I want to analyze only the medium questions. You can search by the cross test and subscores. So remember, we talked about how within the ELA areas, there is this breakdown of questions that are related to other content areas like science and social studies and history and so forth. This is where that comes into play. So you could look at questions that only relate to that if you wanted to kind of see how kids are doing with those content area skills. And then you also have the option or ability to download your data into an Excel spreadsheet. So here, I chose to look at only medium level questions that kids scored below the 50th percentile on. And so that's what's sort of shown here. There is a question analysis report that we were just talking about. So this is really going to help you. Why you would want to use this is because it's going to help you consider whether students struggle with particular types of questions. It's going to help you diagnose errors in student choice that they might have made. And it's going to help you redefine your instruction to address areas of weakness. So using the difficulty indicators to determine the level of questions that students are struggling with is really helpful, because you can think about, are students exposed to this content in just one class, in multiple classes? How often are they being exposed to these types of skills? How often are we reinforcing it? We really want to ensure that kids have multiple opportunities to practice these skills across their high school career, content areas, because it's just going to help them apply it better. So if you're going to do this, I would suggest that you review each question included in the report, and then consider the structure of the questions, like we were talking about earlier, as well as the knowledge and skills that are required for the kids to be successful. Then you would diagnose the errors in student choice by understanding the correct answer, and then use the difficulty indicators to determine the level of questions in which students are struggling. So if they're struggling with all types of questions, this may indicate that they're not exposed to that content enough in class. And a curriculum review at that point might be super helpful. And then as students are struggling with difficult questions, you might collaborate with other teachers to determine how to increase the level of difficulty with the practice in the classroom, as well as your assessments and other activities. And then identifying those cross-test scores and sub-scores and how they relate to each question is really helpful, because you can look for connections among questions and scores to identify those areas of focus. And again, do a curriculum review in those content areas, whether it's science or social studies or history. And then teachers can review their lessons and activities to ensure that they have, again, those multiple opportunities of practice. This right here, this is from the instructional planning report, which is another option when you log into the College Board. So this is a great report because, again, you can look at your school in comparison to the state and other schools in the district. It's also going to allow you to see students within each performance group, as noted in the blue down here under the red section. This kind of tells you what those colors mean a little bit. So green, obviously good. They are meeting or exceeding the benchmark. Yellow, those are the students, sometimes we typically refer to them as maybe on the cusp. They didn't quite meet the benchmark, but they are within a year's growth of being able to do so. And then the red indicates that students in this area are unfortunately more than a year's growth behind what SAT and College Board consider to be grade level benchmarks. This one right here, this is the college growth, this is the growth report that allows you to track and growth of a cohort from 8th and 9th grade PSAT, 9th and 10th PSAT, and then the SAT, which can project their achievement on future administrations of the SAT. So if you are a district where kids start taking the PSAT as young as 8th grade or even 9th grade, this is going to be an awesome report, because as those kids progress in that cohort, it's really going to show the progression of their skills and their learning and their scores over time. And then we can see it again here in a little bit different format. So looking at that cohort from their 8th and 9th grade PSAT all the way up through and how they scored. All right, so before we go into protocols, I just want to double check, Heather, is there any questions?
I don't think so.
All right,
That's
great.
good.
Fabulous. All right, so we're going to keep moving along then. So now let's think about protocols to look at all of that data. So you might have specific teams set up, and these are some things to think about as you think about the types of people that will go into these teams and what they're going to be looking at. So in your district data teams, you're going to be looking at trends across the district, both horizontally and vertically. And they are also in charge of accountability protocols. The school leadership team is set up to also have accountability protocols to define and ensure that things are being followed, as well as looking at patterns and trends in the school level data, and then disseminating that information to all stakeholders. And then your PLC teams should be comprised of grade levels or content areas or both. And these teams are really looking at student assessment results of all kinds and creating SMART goals that are going to drive their instruction. So this is a protocol that can be used when looking at data. We use this a lot here at Demonstrated Success. So in the first phase, you are making some predictions and thinking about assumptions. In phase 2, you're observing the data. So this is where you're looking for patterns and trends, and you're keeping it to just the observations. In phase 3, you're starting to make inferences and interpretations. And then in phase 4, you're coming up with those implications for practice. What are we going to do about this? What's next? What has the data shown us about our school? What do we need in terms of professional development, etc. And then in phase 5, you're going to do some reflecting. So this is the stage where you are going to reflect on the protocol and, looking at data, and if anything that you implemented worked, and, thinking about what you're going to continue to improve on, how your thinking's changed, etc. This is a note-taking sheet that some of you may find helpful as you go through that data dive with the protocol we just discussed. You could have this in hard copy or electronically for members of data teams to record their thoughts and observations at each stage of that protocol. So this is just a closer look at phase 1. And you, again, are going to get a copy of this presentation. So if you wanted to do this at a PLC meeting or in a district team data meeting, and you wanted to make copies of these slides and show, project them, this is great. But it's really important to stick to the individually and silently part of the protocols at first, because this allows everyone to sort of get some thoughts down on paper. It's going to allow some think time, and it's going to allow everyone's voice to be heard through writing before you get to the conversation, or both, just to keep the conversation on track instead of everyone just agreeing with one sort of trajectory or viewpoint and having it go totally from there. So here's phase 2. Again, this is the no because phase. This is probably the thing that stands out the most about this phase. This is the hardest part for educators. As educators, I think we want to just go right to the reasons why. But in this phase, it's not the place to do that. This phase is really all about data and facts and evidence and nothing but. This isn't on the original protocol wheel that I just showed you a few slides back. However, it is super important. You really want to start refining and quantifying data, which again can be really hard for educators to do at some points. But really, not just saying, oh, kids just don't do well with key ideas and details, but saying, oh, I'm noticing 62% of our kids scored a 2 or below in key ideas and details. So really quantifying that. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about using the SAT data for instructional change. What I really want to encourage you to do is to use this data to help inform your instruction. So not just for 11th grade teachers, but for all teachers to track progress and growth in order to inform instructional practices across cohorts of students. So admins and school counselors, again, make sure that teachers can get this data into their hands. For many high schools, this is the one and only piece of data that is really universal and nationally normed. So it's really important teachers can look at this.
We do have one question just about what data folks should be looking at. We have somebody on the line here that is, their students are mostly special ed or marginalized. So what data should they be looking at? Is there a way to look at that particular?
Yeah, both in iPlatform and the College Board, you can disaggregate your data based on certain populations. And so you could go in there and look at that. In the College Board, I know, which I'm a little more familiar with College Board than the platform, you can even choose specific students. So if you have a list of specific students that you want to look at just their particular data, you can also do that too. So I guess it depends on how many students you have and how many you want to look at a time, but there's definitely ways to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I hope that answered the question. If not, reach out. Are there any other questions, Heather?
No.
All right. So again, we want to use this. So this is phase 3 of that data protocol we were just talking about. This is where we really begin to think about why the data is the way that it is. And this is where historical data can be really important, because while COVID has obviously impacted student learning, there's definitely no question about it. COVID is not the only reason students may be performing poorly. The data may have been just as poor, if not worse, before COVID hit. So this is really, again, where historical data can come into play. It's also important to think about what the data is not telling you and where and how you might find the answers to determine what to do next. And then phase 4, this is all about action, right? So now that you've predicted and you've observed and you've come up with some possible explanations, now you and your team are going to think about what's next. What do I do? What are some action steps? Does it make sense to analyze items associated with kids in low performing areas? What can we learn about items that kids may be constantly omitting? What are some similarities between those items that students scored poorly on? Is there a group of students that need intervention or an alternative course of structure? Does there need to be a schedule around when certain subjects are taught? For example, if you know that the kids are taking the SAT in March and you don't start teaching them algebra until 4th quarter, that may be a problem. That may be why your kids are not doing well on the math portion of the SAT, for example. It really depends on how your school is structured and set up. And then from there, this could also be part of phase 4. You want to start thinking about SMART goals. So teachers set SMART goals every year for observational purposes, or at least they do in a lot of districts. So this is a really great way to think about SMART goals in relation to your instruction and impact on students in relation to this data. And then here's an example of a SMART goal using the SAT. You can use the Common Core standards. You should use the Common Core standards as a guide if you need to. But here's one here. So you're going to set a SMART goal. So, by May of 2022, 42% of students will be on track for the college and career readiness in expression of ideas according to the SAT school day. And then you can see that we've listed some specific action steps that we as a school or a district are going to do to help get the kids there. And then you would discuss those, maybe come up with some other things. The blue link here is a hyperlink to the example template filled out with a year-long SMART goal and action steps that are going to be done throughout the year using the SAT data in mind. So you'll get to see that. This is a blank template of what that year-long action step template will look like that I just mentioned. So again, this is really great to track progress towards your year-long SMART goal and create accountability for all stakeholders. And then here's just another example that you can use the SAT. So this was from that instructional planning report that I showed you a few slides back. Remember, green, they are exceeding. Yellow is almost there, but they're still within a year's worth of growth according to the 11th grade benchmark. And then red, they're about 2 years or more behind. But this image here is just kind of showing you what the current situation might be and then how I would set a SMART goal for the next SAT day-to-day in 2023. And then this is just another example of a template that you may find helpful. I wanted to give people choice and different options, just like we would want to give our students, right? Because something works differently for everyone. So this is just another way that you can track progress towards year-long SMART goals. And this will be in that handout section as well. All this stuff will be along with a copy of this presentation. And then finally, this is just another way to break down SMART goals. Again, it will be in the resource folder here. So with that in mind.
So one thing just to add to that, I think what Tammy and I see a lot with the SAT is that folks look at it and they look at it, okay, this is where students are in 11th grade in their junior year. And what really needs to be thought about and looked at is what is being done in 9th and 10th grade leading up to that particular assessment in 11th grade. So when you are talking about sharing this data or creating SMART goals or doing any of that, make sure you're keeping in mind your teachers who teach freshman classes, sophomore classes, or classes that are going to be accessible to students before that they are getting ready for that SAT. So it's not just those junior year classes that are the important ones. So that just seems to be a misconception that we see a lot when folks look at SAT data. They have all of their, teachers that maybe teach a little bit higher level classes, but it's those entry level classes that also need to have this thought in mind.
Yeah, exactly. Like we said, it's not just 11th grade teachers, but it's everybody. And I think as educators, we have to get in the mindset that these are not your kids or their kids, but these are our kids. Like we are all responsible. The math teachers, the 8 math teachers in a building cannot be the only ones responsible for ensuring that kids are successful with, math computations or looking at graphs or interpreting data or whatever. Same for English teachers. There's a million Common Core standards. There's even some literacy standards specifically for the technical subjects, history, social studies, etc. But it cannot be on the shoulders of those, 8, 10, however many English teachers you have. So we really have to look at this data across content and grade levels and really use that PSAT data to really, trace those cohorts of kids over time. And even senior English teachers, senior teachers, whether it's English or science or social studies, whatever, even though the kids don't have an SAT day for senior year, it is really important because while colleges have gotten away from, a lot of them have diverted away from requiring the SAT for entrance, I think we're going to start seeing it come back as, kids get reacclimated into school coming off from the COVID years. And for a lot of kids, they'll retake the SAT their senior year as well. But it's not just about getting into college, it's about career readiness as well. And again, when the new SAT comes out in 2024, they're going to give kids more information about their scores as to how it relates to those career and technical fields as well. So before we end, I just want to see if there was any final questions that people may have. I know I threw a lot at you, but I wanted to respect your time, given that it's probably your last week of school and a Thursday afternoon. So Heather, are there any other questions?
I don't see any, thank you.
Okay, great. So before you cut out, just one more thing. I did want to end a few minutes early to give you time to do this. So Heather's going to be putting a link to a very quick, I promise, survey in the chat. And like she said, if you could just provide us some feedback, this is our data. We want to use this to improve and inform our delivery and our instruction and what we can offer all of you to support you. So we really hope you'll just take a few minutes and do that for us.
There is one sort of question or comment that came through it, and I think you kind of answered that with what the changes that are coming up with the SAT in 2024. It says, what is the role of SATs for struggling students who are not going to college? And it says all our students use SATs for our state test. Yeah. So I think you kind of talked about that, and it's not just about college readiness, but if you had any other thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, like I said, I just want to, you're right. Not all kids are going to go to college. Not all kids, and even if they do, it might be later in life, right? Like they might be taking a gap year, they might be going into the military or the workforce. I know the military requires the ASVAB, which is a different type of standardized test. I think we want to use SAT to inform our instruction, but also to inform us about specific kids with their skills and their abilities, and where they need support and where they're already doing well, and what that means for them going into some of these career fields as well. And like I said, the SAT that's coming in 2024 will give kids more information about their specific scores and what fields they might be great at, to go into that. But right now, that's just, you can use that as a teacher to say, oh, you seem really great with numbers and computations while you're not going to college. Maybe you want to think about, doing some sort of career, like maybe working at a bank, which doesn't necessarily require a college degree, or, oh, you seem to know a lot about, this particular subject or whatever. Here's some things that may be helpful to you. And then while you are finishing up the survey, we do want to encourage you, if there is anything else that you think of, please reach out to any of us. Again, I'm Tammy. Heather's been our wonderful moderator, and then Annie is your DOE representative. And if anything comes up in relation to the SAT or the data or the protocols, please, please, please reach out. We'd be more than happy to support. So with that, we want to thank you so much for joining us. Again, happy summer vacation. Congratulations, you did it. And we thank you for joining us on this, warm, sunny afternoon.